Beyond the glittering stars of the Andromeda system, humanity faced its most humiliating moment. Frank Miller stood rigid at the presentation podium, his hands gripping the sides as laughter echoed through the vast chamber of the interstellar summit. The blue-skinned Veltraxian delegate was nearly doubled over with amusement. The crystalline Nexari representatives vibrated with what passed for hilarity in their species. You expect us to believe your species has achieved dimensional folding with such primitive technology. The Veltraxian ambassador's translator barely kept up with his rapid speech. Humans cannot even perceive beyond 4 dimensions. Frank swallowed hard, glancing at his colleague Lisa Green, who sat stiffly in the front row. Her face remained professional, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. Earth's first attempt at multidimensional travel, the culmination of 50 years of research, had become the cosmic joke of the day. The mathematics is sound, Frank insisted, advancing to the next slide of his presentation. Our Horizon vessel successfully manipulated spacetime during 3 separate trials. A ripple of renewed laughter spread through the assembly of over 30 advanced species. The Collective Alliance of Superior Species, or CASS as humans had come to know them, had welcomed Earth into their interstellar community just 15 years ago. But welcome didn't mean respect. Your manipulation barely scratches 5-dimensional space, called out a hooded figure from the vac. My offspring achieved better results with their educational toys. More laughter. Frank felt sweat beading on his forehead. Perhaps, said Nexari Ambassador Zilka, her crystalline form refracting light across the chamber, humans are simply dimension-blind primitives. No offense intended, of course. None taken, Lisa replied automatically, though her clenched jaw suggested otherwise. The Veltraxian delegate waved a dismissive tentacle. The Alliance appreciates Earth's enthusiasm, but perhaps you should focus on less ambitious projects. Your planetary defense systems remain woefully inadequate, and your climate restoration efforts could benefit from our assistance. Frank forced a smile. We value your guidance, but humanity believes multidimensional travel is the future of interstellar relations. Our research shows. Your research, interrupted the 8-limbed opaline representative, fails to account for quantum dimensional interference patterns that any novice physicist in our culture would recognize. You're like children playing with mathematical concepts you cannot possibly comprehend. The diplomatic conference room, with its sweeping views of the 3 moons of Veltrax Prime, suddenly felt suffocating. Earth's delegation had traveled 17 light-years for this opportunity, using KS-provided transport since humans had yet to develop their own reliable interstellar vessels. As Frank concluded his presentation to scattered applause and barely concealed smirks, Lisa joined him at the podium to collect their materials. That went well, she whispered sarcastically. They don't understand what we're trying to accomplish, Frank replied, gathering his data tablets. They think dimensionally, just like we used to. They're fixed on the conventional 6th dimension as the limit. Lisa sighed. Because it is the limit, Frank. Every species here has tried to breach it. The Veltraxians have been working on it for 3 millennia. As they walked from the chamber, a tall, gray-skinned Meridian scientist approached them. Interesting theory, humans. Flawed, but interesting. Your species has unusual intuitive leads. Frank nodded politely, recognizing the backhanded compliment for what it was. Later, aboard the CAS transport vessel returning to Earth, Frank stared out at the streaking stars. Lisa found him there, 2 hours into the journey. They're wrong about us, he said without turning. Frank. No, listen. They're seeing what we're doing, not what we could do. He turned to her, eyes bright with determination. We need to stop trying to impress them with conventional approaches. What if the 7th dimension isn't unreachable? What if we're just using the wrong method? Lisa studied her colleague's face, seeing the familiar stubborn resolve. When we get home, Frank said quietly, I'm going to prove every one of those smug aliens wrong. 5 years passed since the humiliation at the Interstellar Summit. Deep beneath the Nevada desert, behind 3 layers of security clearance and official denials, Project Transcendence had taken shape. The facility sprawled underground, a maze of laboratories, testing chambers, and computational centers powered by experimental fusion reactors. Director Olivia Bennett surveyed the central chamber where the vessel took form. Unlike conventional spacecraft, this creation resembled an elongated teardrop with an iridescent surface that seemed to shift and move even when perfectly still. "How are the calibrations coming along?" she asked, joining John Daniels at his workstation. The physicist didn't look up from his equations. "We've mapped quantum pathways that theoretically extend beyond the sixth dimension. The math works, but implementing it." He gestured at the holographic models swirling above his desk. "Show me," Olivia said, pulling up a chair. John manipulated the display. Traditional understanding views dimensions sequentially. The Veltraxians, Nexari, all of them. They try to stack dimensional access like floors in a building. He collapsed the model and rebuilt it. But what if dimensions aren't linear? What if they're more like? His hands moved rapidly, transforming the model into something resembling a blooming flower. "Petals of the same flower," Olivia finished, accessible simultaneously with the right approach. From across the room, Samantha Powell joined them, carrying a small cube of material that seemed to flicker in and out of visibility. "The quantum materials are responding to the new parameters. Sometimes I swear they're disappearing completely, then reappearing." This was why Olivia had selected them. John with his unorthodox theoretical models rejected by mainstream science. Samantha with her revolutionary materials engineering that chaos representatives had dismissed as quaint. Each team member shared one trait. They'd been overlooked, underestimated, or outright mocked by the galactic community. "Progress report on the neural interface." Olivia called to another section of the lab. Alex Morgan, neuroscientist, and the youngest member of the team, looked up from his station. "Fascinating results, Director. Human brains appear uniquely suited to process seven-dimensional stimuli. Other species might actually be at a disadvantage here." A spark of hope ignited in Olivia's chest. Frank Miller had been right when he proposed this project. Humanity's supposed weakness, their newcomer status, their different evolutionary path, might actually be their greatest strength. The facility shuddered suddenly as a distant boom echoed through the corridors. Security alarms blared. "What was that?" Samantha asked, carefully securing her material sample. Olivia's communication device buzzed. She answered quickly, her expression darkening. "Understood. Lock down the project. Deploy countermeasures." She turned to the team. "KAS intelligence agents. Somehow they've discovered us." "Impossible," John protested. "We're completely off the books." Apparently not completely enough. Olivia moved to the central console and initiated emergency protocols. "They've been suspicious since our funding disappeared from public records. Now they're making their move." Alex looked up from his station. "The neural mapping isn't complete. If they shut us down now—" "They won't," Olivia interrupted, "because we're launching today." Stunned silence fell across the lab. "The Ascendant isn't ready," Samantha protested. "The dimensional core is untested outside simulation." Olivia's eyes fixed on the vessel. "It's ready enough. We either prove our theory works today, or we lose everything." She activated the facility-wide communication system. "This is Director Bennett. All Project Transcendence personnel, initiate launch sequence Alpha. This is not a drill." As the team scrambled to their stations, Olivia opened a secure channel to their pilot team, led by Captain Eric Wilson. "Captain, how quickly can your crew be ready?" His voice came back without hesitation. "My people can be in position in 15 minutes, Director." Olivia watched as the ceiling above the Ascendant began to retract, revealing the night sky above the desert. "Make it 10, she said. "We're about to change humanity's place in the universe." Captain Eric Wilson settled into the command seat of the Ascendant as warning lights flashed throughout the vessel. The interior hummed with energy as the dimensional core powered up, casting an unearthly glow through the cabin. His small crew worked efficiently at their stations, the tension evident in their focused silence. "Core reaching nominal parameters," reported Greg Harrison, the systems specialist. His fingers danced across the control surfaces that responded to both touch and thought. "We're registering some unusual quantum fluctuations." Karen Martinez, their navigation specialist, frowned at her readings. "These coordinates don't make conventional sense, Captain. We're plotting a course through dimensional space that technically doesn't exist according to standard models." "That's the point," Eric replied, strapping himself in more securely. Through the viewing panel, he could see security forces engaging with what appeared to be KASS agents at the perimeter of the facility. Flashes of energy weapons illuminated the desert night. Director Bennett's voice came through the communication system. "Captain, our sensors detect 2 CASS vessels entering Earth's atmosphere. You need to launch now. We'll hold them off as long as possible." Eric nodded to his crew. "Initiate dimensional sequence." As Greg activated the core, strange phenomena began to manifest throughout the ship. Objects seemed to blur at their edges. Crew members reported seeing shadowy versions of themselves performing actions moments before they actually did them. "What's happening?" asked Natalie Reeves, their medical officer, as she watched her hand appear to exist in multiple places simultaneously. "The ship is perceiving seventh-dimensional space," Karen replied, her voice filled with wonder. "And somehow so are we." Outside the vessel, the air shimmered and distorted. The Ascendant's exterior shifted colors that had no names in human language. In the control center below, John Daniels stared at incoming data with growing excitement. "It's working. The human consciousness is actually interfacing with higher dimensions. Our minds are adapting to perceive what our instruments barely detect." Olivia watched as readings surged across monitors. "What are those energy signatures?" "Unknown," Samantha answered, "but they seem to be responding to the crew's neural patterns. It's as if something out there recognizes them." Aboard the Ascendant, the crew experienced increasingly bizarre perceptual shifts. Eric saw timelines branching and reconnecting like rivers. Karen perceived spatial relationships as musical harmonies rather than distances. Greg witnessed the underlying mathematical patterns of reality itself. "Captain," Karen called out, her voice strained, "I'm detecting entities in the dimensional boundary we're approaching. They're aware of us." Eric felt something brush against his consciousness, an intelligence so vast and alien that his mind could barely comprehend it. Yet somehow it felt curious rather than threatening. "They're trying to communicate," Natalie said, monitoring the crew's neural responses. "Our brains are rewiring themselves to understand." Suddenly, the dimensional core pulsed with blinding energy. The entire vessel shuddered as it fully breached the barrier between conventional space and the seventh dimension. In that moment, every crew member experienced the same vision. Countless civilizations spread across realities they had never imagined, watching humanity's first steps into their realm with something akin to astonishment. "They never expected us to succeed," Karen whispered. "No species has ever accessed this dimensional plane while maintaining physical form." Below in the control center, alarms blared as KAS agents breached the outer defenses. "We're losing contact with the Ascendant," John reported urgently. Olivia gripped the console. "Can you re-establish connection?" "I'm trying, but—" John stopped mid-sentence, staring at his readings. "Director, the Ascendant hasn't disappeared. It's transcended our ability to track it. It's still there, just operating on principles we can't fully measure." On a tactical display, the 2 approaching KS vessels suddenly altered course, accelerating away from Earth at maximum speed. "They're retreating," Samantha said in disbelief. What could have scared them off? The answer came as a voice echoed through their communication system. Captain Wilson's voice, somehow altered, richer with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible. "Project Transcendence successful. We have made contact. And Director, they've been waiting for us." The Ascendant drifted through what the crew could only describe as the between space, a realm where conventional physics surrendered to new rules. Colors existed that had no names, geometries formed that contradicted Euclidean mathematics, and time itself seemed to flow in multiple directions simultaneously. Captain Eric Wilson maintained remarkable composure despite the overwhelming sensory input. "Status report," he requested, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears, as if he'd spoken the words before and after uttering them. Greg checked systems that seemed both familiar and alien. Core stability at 120%, which should be impossible. Hull integrity. He paused. The concept doesn't quite translate here, but we're secure. Karen's navigation console displayed information that resembled musical notation more than spatial coordinates. "Captain, conventional location is meaningless, but I'm perceiving pathways. It's like seeing currents in an ocean." The seventh dimension wasn't empty. As their perceptions adjusted, the crew became aware of entities moving around them. Beings composed of shifting probabilities and mathematical relationships rather than matter. "They're communicating," Natalie said, monitoring the crew's neural patterns. "Not with words, but through conceptual packets. Our brains are translating as best they can." Eric felt it too, impressions forming directly in his mind. They're surprised. No physical beings have entered this realm before. "What are they?" Greg asked, watching as patterns of light and complex geometry drifted past the viewport. "I think they're the natives of this dimensional layer," Karen replied. "And if I'm interpreting correctly, they're offering to guide us." Eric considered for a moment. Accept their assistance, but maintain core protocols. As Karen acknowledged the entities, the Ascendant began moving along invisible currents, accelerating through the dimension in ways that defied conventional understanding of speed. The crew experienced the journey as both instantaneous and eternal. "I'm receiving knowledge," Natalie said suddenly, her eyes wide, "about how our consciousness interfaces with higher dimensions. Humans possess a unique neural flexibility that allowed us to succeed where other species failed. The rigid thought patterns of older species like the Veltraxians actually prevent seventh-dimensional perception." The ship suddenly emerged into what appeared to be a vast chamber, though chamber inadequately described the space that seemed simultaneously enclosed and infinite. Other entities were gathered here, their forms more defined, more purposeful. "I believe we've been brought to some kind of meeting place," Karen suggested. One entity approached the vessel, its form stabilizing into something almost comprehensible to human senses, a shifting lattice of golden light with centers of deeper complexity. "Captain," Greg called out, "it's requesting permission to establish direct contact with our systems." Eric hesitated. "Limited access only. Keep the core isolated." When the connection formed, the ship's communication system activated, but instead of words, the crew perceived meanings. "We have observed your species. Young. Adaptable. Unlike others. Eric responded aloud, knowing the entity would understand the intention behind his words. "We come peacefully, seeking knowledge and exchange. Others fear what they cannot control. They limit themselves with certainty. You embrace possibility. Natalie's monitoring equipment registered unprecedented activity in all their brains. "Captain, this communication is physically changing our neural pathways. We're evolving to better perceive this dimension." The entity continued. Danger approaches. Those who laughed now fear. They come with weapons of sixth-dimensional energy. Karen's console flashed with new information. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple TASS vessels converging on our last known position in normal space. They're searching for us." The entity pulsed with what they somehow understood as concern. "They cannot follow here, but they will wait. They will hunt. What you have discovered threatens their order. Eric turned to his crew, his expression resolute. "Then it's time to show them exactly what the Ascendant can do. Karen, plot a return course to normal space, specifically to the headquarters of the Collective Alliance." "This is dangerous," the entity cautioned. Yes, Eric agreed, but necessary. The galaxy needs to understand that humanity is no longer just a curiosity to be mocked. As the Ascendant prepared to transition back, the seventh-dimensional entities surrounded the vessel, imparting final gifts of knowledge that hummed through the ship's systems like new life. The Grand Council chamber of the Collective Alliance of Superior Species buzzed with activity. Representatives from 27 advanced civilizations had gathered for an emergency session on the human problem. Massive crystalline view screens displayed tactical information about Earth's defenses and theoretical models of the Ascendant's capabilities, all wildly inaccurate. Admiral Zex Terrell of the Veltraxian fleet addressed the assembly, his blue-skinned face severe under the chamber's bright lights. Our intelligence confirms the humans have created some form of dimensional vehicle, but their primitive technology cannot possibly breach the sixth-dimensional barrier. Their vessel likely disintegrated during the attempt. The Nexori representative, a crystalline being named Shimmer of Deep Thought, vibrated skeptically. Yet 2 of our scout ships fled Earth's solar system in panic. Their crews reported sensing something beyond our understanding. Sensor malfunction, Zex Terrell dismissed with a wave of his tentacle-like hand. Or human deception. Perhaps we should not underestimate them again, suggested the Meridian scientist who had once offered Frank Miller a backhanded compliment years before. Their approach to physics has always been unorthodox. The debate might have continued if not for the sudden dimming of lights throughout the chamber. The view screens flickered and distorted. A high-pitched whine emanated from every communication device simultaneously. Security breach, called a Nexori guard. Unknown energy signature detected. In the center of the chamber, space itself seemed to wrinkle and fold. Colors that had no business existing in normal space flashed like silent lightning. The assembled representatives backed away, some drawing defensive weapons, others simply frozen in disbelief. With a sound like reality tearing along a seam, the Ascendant materialized, not as a conventional spacecraft arriving, but as if it had always been there, merely hidden behind a curtain of perception. Its hull shimmered with impossible geometries that hurt the eyes to look upon directly. "By the eternal void," whispered Zex Terrell, "what have they done?" The Ascendant hovered silently for a moment. Then a section of its hull flowed open like liquid metal, and Captain Eric Wilson stepped out, followed by Karen Martinez. They appeared changed. Their eyes held a depth that hadn't been there before, and subtle patterns of light seemed to flow just beneath their skin. "Greetings, representatives of the Collective Alliance," Eric said, his voice somehow reaching every corner of the vast chamber without electronic amplification. "We apologize for the dramatic entrance, but conventional docking procedures wouldn't accommodate our vessel." The Nexori security forces had their weapons trained on the humans, but Zex Terrell signaled them to hold position. "Captain Wilson of Earth," he acknowledged, managing to keep his voice steady, "you have violated numerous Alliance protocols by bringing an unregistered vessel directly into our sanctuary." Karen smiled. "Your dimensional barriers were designed to stop ships operating within the first 6 dimensions. The Ascendant exists partially in the 7th. Your defenses didn't recognize it as a vessel at all." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Many representatives were surreptitiously scanning the ship with personal devices, their expressions changing from skepticism to shock as readings came back. "Impossible," declared the head of the Opaline delegation, the same individual who had mocked Frank's presentation years ago. "No biological species can perceive beyond the 6th dimension, let alone navigate it. Your machinery must be creating an illusion." Eric extended his hand, and hovering above his palm appeared a miniature representation of the council chamber, but from a perspective that showed every angle simultaneously, including views that should have been physically impossible to observe. "This is how we see now," he explained. "The 7th dimension allows perception of all possibilities coexisting. Your scientists declared it theoretically inaccessible. We simply found a different approach." Zex Terrell's composure finally cracked. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Eric replied. We came to extend an invitation. Humanity is establishing a new research institute dedicated to seventh-dimensional studies. Any species willing to approach the challenge with an open mind is welcome to participate." He paused, surveying the stunned faces. The galactic community laughed at us once. We're not here for revenge or dominance. But the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than any of us imagined. We've only glimpsed the beginning. The Veltraxian battle fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. 12 warships, each nearly a kilometer long, their hulls bristling with weapons designed to operate across multiple dimensions. They formed a precise geometric pattern around the Ascendant, which appeared tiny and vulnerable by comparison. Admiral Zex Terrell's face filled the communication screen. "Captain Wilson, the KS Security Council has determined your vessel represents an unacceptable risk to dimensional stability. You will power down your core and prepare to be boarded." Inside the Ascendant, the crew remained remarkably calm despite being surrounded. Eric exchanged glances with Greg before responding. "Admiral, we've broken no laws. We came in peace to share knowledge." "Knowledge that could destabilize the established order," Zex Terrell replied coldly. "Not all species are prepared for seventh-dimensional access. The Council has voted. The technology must be contained and studied under proper supervision." Karen's voice was low as she reported. "They're charging weapons, sixth-dimensional phase disruptors. They're designed to tear apart the quantum structure of matter." Eric nodded. "So much for diplomatic solutions." He opened the ship-wide communication. "All crew, prepare for core activation. Natalie, activate the neural interfaces." The crew connected to their stations as the ship's systems merged with their consciousness. They no longer operated the Ascendant. They became an extension of it, and it of them. "You have 30 seconds to comply," the Admiral announced. Eric closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he gave the command, "Activate seventh-dimensional core." The effect was immediate and spectacular. The Ascendant's hull shifted, becoming partially transparent as it existed simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. Energy patterns flowed across its surface in mathematical sequences too complex for conventional minds to follow. On the Veltraxian vessels, alarms blared as weapon systems suddenly went offline. Navigation computers displayed impossible readings. The perfectly choreographed fleet formation began to drift apart as ships lost the ability to maintain their positions. "What are you doing?" demanded Zex Terrell, actual fear showing in his eyes for the first time. Eric's voice remained calm. "Nothing aggressive. Admiral, we've simply expanded our dimensional field. Your technology operates on sixth-dimensional principles. In the presence of a seventh-dimensional field, those principles become flexible." Through the Ascendant's enhanced sensors, the crew could perceive the Veltraxian ships as they truly were, not just physical objects but complex patterns of probability and potential energy. With the slightest adjustments to the core's output, they could influence those patterns. Paul Johnson, their communications specialist who had been quiet until now, suddenly straightened at his station. "Captain, I'm receiving contact from seventh-dimensional entities. They're offering assistance." "Accept it," Eric ordered. Hall's eyes widened as information flooded his mind. "They're showing me how to establish a bridge, a way to demonstrate our capabilities without causing harm." What happened next defied description in conventional language. The space between the Ascendant and the Veltraxian fleet seemed to fold. For a brief moment, every crew member on every ship shared the same perception. A glimpse of reality as seen from the seventh dimension. They witnessed their own ships existing across multiple timelines simultaneously, saw the delicate interconnections between dimensions that humans had learned to navigate. When normal perception returned, the Veltraxian fleet found itself completely reconfigured. The 12 warships now floated in a different formation, perfectly aligned to form a complex three-dimensional symbol that, from above, resembled an ancient human insignia for peace. Not a single shot had been fired, not one crew member harmed, but the demonstration of power was unmistakable. "We could have disabled your ships," Eric explained to the stunned admiral. "We could have shifted them into different dimensional planes, never to return. Instead, we simply rearranged them." Zex Terrell stared at the display showing his fleet's new position. The precision required to move 12 massive warships simultaneously without causing internal damage was beyond any technology he knew. "How?" was all he could ask. "The universe is more mutable than you've been taught to believe," Eric replied. "Reality is negotiable when you understand its deeper patterns." The Admiral's voice had lost all its former arrogance. "The Council will need to reconsider its position." Earth had changed in the 6 months since the Ascendant's demonstration of power. The United Nations complex in Geneva now featured a new building unlike any other, the Dimensional Cooperation Center. Its architecture subtly incorporating seventh-dimensional principles that made it appear slightly different depending on the angle from which it was viewed. Inside the Grand Chamber, representatives from 32 alien civilizations gathered alongside human delegates. Some species that had once been Earth's most vocal critics now sat attentively as Director Olivia Bennett addressed the assembly. "When we began Project Transcendence, we sought only to prove humanity's potential," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "We never anticipated becoming the gateway to a new understanding of reality itself." Frank Miller sat in the front row, a satisfied smile on his face. Beside him, Lisa Green shook her head in continued amazement. 5 years ago, they had been laughed out of an interstellar conference. Today, advanced civilizations were establishing embassies on Earth and sending their brightest minds to study at the newly founded Institute for Dimensional Sciences. "The knowledge we've gained doesn't belong to humanity alone," Olivia continued, "which is why today, we're announcing the first joint exploration mission into the 7th dimension. The Ascendant will be joined by vessels from the Nexuri and Meridian fleets, retrofitted with technology we've developed together." From the Nexuri delegation came a sound like crystal chimes, their expression of approval. The Meridian scientist who had once offered Frank a condescending compliment now led his species research team, working alongside human scientists as an equal. Conspicuously absent were the Veltraxians. Following their fleet's humbling encounter, they had withdrawn from most interstellar affairs, focusing inward as they struggled to reconcile their former certainties with new realities. After the assembly, Captain Eric Wilson found himself in the center's garden, designed to accommodate the varied biological needs of multiple species. He watched as Karen Martinez demonstrated seventh-dimensional mathematics to a group of fascinated Opaline scholars, the same species that had once dismissed human science as childish. "It still feels like a dream sometimes," said a voice beside him. Eric turned to find Gray Harrison gazing up at the sky, where the silhouette of the Ascendant could be seen in orbit, its distinctive form instantly recognizable to every being on Earth. "Not a dream," Eric replied. "Just a new reality." Paul Johnson joined them, no longer simply a communications specialist, but Earth's primary liaison to the seventh-dimensional entities. His perception had been the most altered by their contact, allowing him insights that continuously advanced their understanding. "Our friends beyond the veil are pleased," Paul said quietly. "They've been watching our universe for what we call eons, waiting for a species flexible enough to bridge the dimensional gap. They never expected it would be the newcomers." In a nearby conference room, Samantha Powell was finalizing details with Nexuri engineers for the joint mission. The quantum materials she had pioneered now formed the basis for a new generation of technology being adopted across the galaxy. "The most fascinating aspect," she was explaining, "isn't just that we can access the 7th dimension, but how it changes our understanding of the previous 6. Everything we thought we knew about physics was just one perspective on a much larger picture." As dusk fell over Geneva, John Daniels stood on the center's observation deck with a group of students from 12 different worlds. Above them, stars became visible one by one. "The universe is not what we thought," he told them, his voice filled with the wonder he still felt months after the breakthrough. "It's not a fixed set of laws that we discover. It's a conversation we participate in. The seventh dimension showed us that consciousness and reality are more deeply intertwined than we ever imagined. On the Ascendant, now expanded and improved with insights from multiple civilizations, Natalie Reeves prepared the medical bay for the upcoming mission. Research had shown that exposure to seventh-dimensional space was gradually enhancing human capabilities in unexpected ways. Not just perception, but cognition, intuition, even empathy. "We're evolving," she had written in her latest report. "Not just technologically, but biologically. Our minds are adapting to comprehend what was previously incomprehensible." As night fully engulfed the Dimensional Cooperation Center, Olivia Bennett and Frank Miller stood together on the balcony of her office, looking out at the lights of the city where humans and aliens now walked the same streets.